Thank you, Professor Vasily, again. And now, Dr. Larry Lesser is a UTEP Distinguished Teaching Professor in UTEP's Department of Mathematical Science, a long-time supporting faculty member of the UTEP Inter-American Jewish Studies Program, and a collaborator with Music Department faculty on multiple funded projects. He has developed a web page that showcases his papers and funded a speaker series connecting Judaism and math. In 2020, Professor Lesser released an award-winning album of his non-denominational, non-liturgical Jewish song. And you are going to find all the information about the panelists in the program and also the link to the website. So let's welcome Dr.
Okay. So, parables and parabolas. Is that just wordplay, or is there a connection? So, a parabola is like the path of a thrown ball, and the Greek etymology of the words parable and parabola talk about throwing an idea beside another. And so there is a connection there, and there's also a metaphor, because a parabola is a curve where each point is equally distant from a line called the directrix and a point called the focus. And a fable from philosophy has that common focus or point of a moral, some important truth in our lives. I have to show you this real quick here. Being a math guy, I even made a Venn diagram of my intersecting math, music, and Jewish identities, but don't worry, no more math today. I also want to acknowledge that this stage is sort of sacred ground to me. 5 years ago, I had the profound experience of playing my song about dialogue with a Palestinian-American UTEP colleague with the backing of the stellar 20-person Layali al-Sham, spanning many cultures. So it's really a pleasure to be back on the stage today. And so I learned about this awesome opera right after hearing the good news that UTEP was bringing back the Jewish Studies program. I was very happy to hear that. And so, yes, applause for that. And so it was very natural for me to reflect on connections of Judaism and this opera. And from the 4 specific fables in the opera, as you can see in my table here, I was able to readily identify similar sentiments in Jewish text, some of which perhaps are pre-Aesop, but others are definitely post-Aesop. And of course, these overlap with many other cultures and faiths, as you've heard from the other speakers. For example, where the arrow is basically the golden rule, which is in, I was going to say every religion, but I don't know if that's, so I'll say almost every religion. It's got to be almost all true, if not totally true. And so I reflected further on connections with the opera's theme of kindness and the role of parables and how parables are different from fables. Judaism certainly has a huge literature and culture of kindness. In italics here are the Hebrew words that if you did a Google search on, you would get tons of stuff if you'd like to read about it. Chesed and Gemilut Chasadim would be how you would pronounce that. And there's also a big tradition of parables in Judaism. They're called mashal sometimes, as well as midrash, where you have allegorical stories to communicate different things. But I had not thought before about how these parables in Judaism could have been influenced by the fables of Aesop. So thank you for giving me this excuse to look into that. So first I looked into the timing, and the timing is totally plausible because Aesop lived 6th century BCE, and apparently some of the fables he went around telling, he may not have been the one to write them. He might have been sharing some of them that had been written even before that. Whereas the Talmud was written down much later than that, around 200 and 500 in the Common Era. So quite a bit different. Now, I just used the word Talmud, so let me just give you a quick 1-minute crash course on words like that. So the written Torah is what I guess non-Jews might call the Old Testament, but Jews prefer saying Hebrew Bible to avoid suggesting that our covenant is out of date or something, you know. And it comprises the 5 books of Moses, and then 8 books called prophets, and then 11 more books called writings. But there's also the oral Torah, which is what's called the Talmud, which is transmitted through the generations to be able to properly interpret and teach what is in the written Torah. But with the loss of the Second Temple, the fall of Jerusalem, and the threat from the Romans, it became clear that the oral Torah needed to get written down also to make sure it endured, and that happened around the year 200. And so the Mishnah is a commentary on the Torah, and like the Torah, it's written in Hebrew, and the Gemara is a later commentary on the Mishnah, and it's written some in Hebrew, but mostly in Aramaic. And then there's Midrash. I know it sounds like a Middle Eastern skin disease or something, but it refers to Agadah, the parables, mostly, or stories where you illustrate things with allegory and more figurative language. Okay, well, here's what a page of Talmud looks like, if you've ever been curious. And it's kind of like a prototype for hyperlinks, because you've got the core part in the middle of the Mishnah and the Gemara that I mentioned, but sandwiched around it in multiple layers, you've got commentary and then commentary on the commentaries and so on, because it's this sort of dialogue going among people throughout the centuries. And so it's really cool, as like Dr. Morales talked about, you know, is there just one meaning? You can find just one moral or meaning of something. Well, a page of Talmud kind of blows it out of the water, because, in fact, there's a saying that Torah, there's 70 faces of Torah, that you actually, it's not only okay, that you expect to find multiple meanings. And even when things have to get resolved in a way just for practical reasons, the minority opinions are respectfully preserved and kept on the page also. So everyone remains on the same page, even if they disagreed. What a model for conflict resolution that would be in today's polarized times, you know. Okay, so the parable that inspired the song that you heard me play is from Tractate Brachot. That word means blessings. And I actually studied that tractate here in El Paso in classes at Temple Mount Sinai, which is about 2 miles from where we're sitting. And so this is a translation of the parable. And so you basically know the storyline because you heard me sing it in the song. But one thing that really stuck out to me, my songwriter radar went off, because there's a line that's in there 3 times. So I'm thinking, wow, this could be, I could tell the story in 3 verses, because this sort of common refrain breaks it into 3 verses, or that common line could become the chorus. And, you know, it was just asking, I don't know why no one else had thought to put this particular story into a song before me, but at least I grabbed it. So, and like a good fable, and I added a 4th verse of my own, you might have heard in the song, which is kind of like a form of midrash, where I'm encountering myself in the story and applying it to my life. And like a good fable, the song does have a moral, namely that bad events can end up as blessings, which is perhaps, you know, a cosmic kindness, and also perhaps a caution for us to be a little slower to judge outcomes or appearances. There's a lot of things this might make you think of. I mean, some of you may, if you're a country music fan, you might think of the Garth Brooks hit, Unanswered Prayers, where the long, happily married singer gives thanks that he didn't end up marrying the person he once prayed to end up with. Remember that? And perhaps the opening of the song with the no room at the inn made you think about Bethlehem. But we don't have to go all the way back to the Talmud or the Christian Bible for a no room at the inn story. Because if we just go back to this past Christmas weekend, when 47 people died as Buffalo was slammed with like 5 feet of snow in 5 days, and that Friday night, the snow was falling, the temperature was falling, the gas gauge needles of cars were falling, and a stranded motorist named Jay Withy knocked on 10 doors, offering $500 just to be able to sleep on the floor for the night. He was turned away all 10 times. And so to save his life and 20 other stranded motorists, and 2 dogs it turned out, he broke into a neighborhood school that he happened upon. Now think about it. If just one of those 10 houses had let him in, he wouldn't have broken into the school and saved those lives. So it doesn't take a lot of imagination to bring these stories all the way up to the present, does it? But back to the Talmud. What blew me away was on the very next page from that story about Rabbi Akiva's travels was a parable told by Rabbi Akiva. Now it's clearly in the form of a fable because the characters are animals. You got the fox and the fish. It contains a moral lesson at the end, and even more specific, the bad guy is the fox, right? I guess I could read it real quick. Rabbi Akiva answered him, I will relate a parable. To what can this be compared? It is like a fox walking along a riverbank when he sees fish gathering and fleeing from place to place. The fox said to them, From what are you fleeing? They said to him, We are fleeing from the nets that people cast upon us. He said to them, Do you wish to come up onto dry land and will reside together just as my ancestors resided with your ancestors? The fish said to the fox, You are the one of whom they say he is the cleverest of animals. You are not clever, you are a fool. If we are afraid in the water, our natural habitat which gives us life, then in a habitat that causes our death, all the more so. The moral is, so too we Jews, now that we sit and engage in Torah study, we fear the empire to this extent. If we proceed to sit idle from its study, as its abandonment is the habitat that causes our death, all the more so will we fear the empire. This page about fable from the Jewish Virtual Library had many fascinating further examples, including noting several places in the Talmud that refer to fox fables, both as individual stories as well as a group of these stories. So it's absolutely clear the sages of the Talmud knew about and were influenced by Aesop's fables. The most famous collection of fox fables was written by Berchaya ben Natronai ha-Nakdan, a Jewish philosopher and biblical commentator who lived in France about 8 centuries ago. And perhaps what says it all is the translation of his collection that's for sale on Amazon. Check out the title, Fables of a Jewish Aesop. And this last comment I'll just make here, there's an interesting entry in the Jewish Encyclopedia that traces how Talmudic fables, or sayings that imply fables, connect with those from India and or Greece. Thank you all for having me on this panel. It's a lot of fun.
All right, so I'm going to invite our panelists to come to the stage and take a seat in the beautiful setting. And so I would like to know if you have any questions or comments.
Turn off the lights, please. Someone turn the house lights.
All right. Because I cannot see, but all right.
I'll
Okay.
take care of the microphone on the floor, and if you'll pass it
Oh,
around between
all
the
right.
panels.
Sure. We can do that. So questions or comments? Any thought about these presentations? The music? Are you all going to get your tickets? Yes, please buy several tickets for your neighbors, your friends, right? All right.
Does anyone have a question or a comment? Really? Do you all have questions or comments that could start the discussion?
Yes, of course. I would like to ask, what do you think about the idea that Aesop is not actually a person that existed, right? That maybe it was a collective who actually created the fables and the stories. So would that change your perspective about the fables and the stories, their usefulness?
Well, I think that's precisely, maybe that's part of the moral philosophy that we're supposed to get, right? It's this as I was reading into Aesop, yeah, there was that idea that was there like a person, or did the stories just sort of take on a life of themselves and evolved, and then they sort of became connected to this, a character, right? You could say more than a person. And so that's very much part of the artistic evolution that I was talking about, is the making of, right? In lots of ways, is Aesop's fables are constantly evolving, and the interpretations are constantly evolving. So Aesop himself is the making of Aesop along these ways. So I think that that's very much part of, making music, writing lyrics, and part of a lot of cultural expressions.
I would add to that, one of my favorite quotes that Bob Dylan said was that a song is anything that can walk by itself. In other words, once the song is written, it has its own life, and people are it's gonna travel places and be interpreted in ways that the creator could not have imagined. And so, whether Aesop wrote the thing or disseminated and that someone else wrote, or maybe even neither, if it's attached to his name, a lot of things get attached to people's names when they were not the person to create it, but just maybe the person to get the word out, right? And I mean, even in math, like, you all know about the Pythagorean theorem with the right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But there's a lot of things attributed to this one guy named Pythagoras that may have been just part of the Pythagorean school. And maybe it was some other person, right? I mean, we don't know, but it doesn't keep us from using the result. So, and I love the comment about how things are just always becoming. Just in a couple of brief meetings with Professor Duke, my songs have already kind of changed a little bit to visualize them in this setting. So I heartily second that, and thank you.
I'm not an expert actually in these topics, honestly. I'm a visual person, designer. So maybe next question I will answer.
Yes, I have a question that you may start with this next round. If there are no other questions, okay, we have one. So maybe that's one that you.
Hello. I just want to bring up something that Dr. Cristina Morales brought up during her presentation, the idea of shared morality across cultures. I just want to ask about what do you make of the fact that many cultures, namely Jewish, Persian, and West and European cultures, both get many of their values or their moral values from the same share of fables?
Thank you for your question. I think that's excellent. It's the way that I've been thinking about this idea that you're bringing up. And I think the best way that it captures for me is, like I mentioned, that song that you listen and sometimes you think, wow, that was written just for me, right? When it's written by somebody who maybe has no connection to your culture whatsoever, very distinct, maybe a different time period, and you think it was for you because you relate to it in a manner that you are seeing yourself in those writings, right? So I think that is what we are all seeing, that there's different. It's not one morality, it's not one nugget to take away, but there's several, right? There's several. And so each culture, each individual person gets from it whatever they need at that particular moment. I think that's the conclusion that I came from it. And I think that's why it relates to sort of so many different cultures and different time periods, because there's so many different ways of looking at it that you could reread it and be in a different state of mind or undergone a different experience, and then you still think it was written just for you, right?
I'm reminded of the parable of the 5 blind men and the elephant, where depending on what part of the elephant you're standing next to, you think an elephant is like a spear or a hose or a fan, or so.
Yes, I was reading an article, in fact, just yesterday, and the topic was the Mexican dichos, sayings, and a lot of that has like a fable to it because it's a lot of common items that one would encounter, like if you were raised on a ranch, and I can see where a lot of these things may be crossbred, because when you think of Mexico, you have the Spanish, and when you think of the Spanish, you think about the Moors were there for a good long term, and there was also a big Jewish time for Spain. So I'm sure if someone were to spend some time studying, that there would be a lot of common threads in a lot of these bite-sized, well, the fables or dichos, which are like bite-sized bits of knowledge.
Thank you. I want to just say that as we're staging the opera, we have this. I've had this experience as directing it that the fables themselves are really very, very short, dichos, and they're based on art songs that were previously written by our composer. And an art song is 2 or 3 minutes long. In some cases, these art songs are less than 2 minutes. And she took those art songs to create this 35-minute opera that you'll see on Monday and Tuesday. But as you saw today, we did 4 fables, and it was about 13 minutes. So, dichos, indeed. Yeah. We have another question in the back, but if you have
Do we have another question? Yes, okay.
I'm finding, I have the question of, I'm trying to pick, there's kind of 2 parts to my question. So if I understand correctly, you've all come here with your panel discussions or with your thoughts on today's opera, but this is the first time you're seeing that, correct? So I'm curious, as kind of like a little case study, if you will, what were your thoughts on some of the morals that you took away from this as we're exploring this this commonality, but also this individuality within this?
That's a really good question. And for some reason, what stood out to me was the sweater. And it seems like it's a very small part of the whole, opera, but it was so, it's the extension of the grandmother's love, right, to the granddaughter. And the grandfather's saying, that's just an object. Why are you so attached to this object? It's just a thing, right? And when I was putting together my presentation and thinking about how music connected with sociology, that was one of the frames of thought, was like music as an object, and then people being critical of that, like it's more than just a thing, right? And so that really stood out to me because this is the extension of her love, right? That sweater symbolizes the hard work that the grandmother put together to make the sweater, but also an extension of the love that she has for her granddaughter, right? And there's so many objects that we just take for granted all the time. When we cross the lawn in Centennial Hall, do we think, wow, there was a groundskeeper who put the seeds there for us to have grass and turn on the water to make sure it grows right and took care so that we could enjoy it. And we just pass on like if it's just a thing. And so that's kind of what resonated with me.
I think I remember when I was child, I was fighting with my cousin, and my grandfather at that time told me, we had a very big house at his house, and he came to us and said, why you are fighting? And I said, Actually he picked one of my things, toys, and he said, "Do you want to give it to him, or just continue fighting?" And I said, "I don't know, but this is mine. I don't want to give that." So he said that exactly sentence that I see here, and treat everyone the way that you want treat you. You like to treat with you. So I remember that, you know, and always I'm telling this to my friends in my job, for example, to my wife. Sometimes these kind of simple things are really important in our life, you know, as a human. It doesn't different, you know, culture, your history, your background. It's for human, you know. And I like this, for example, these stories, and I have read them before that in Persian, and the things is, they are so simple, very simple, and they want to convey their message to everyone, all the classes. And this is the thing. This is the point, that they are so common in all these cultures, because we can understand them. We don't need to, learn for example, fundamentals of Jewish or Persian or Christian, all these things. We don't need to learn all of these things to understand, you know. We just need to be human, and all these things wants us to be a good human, you know.
Well, I think these are the exact words, the perfect words to say goodbye today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And hasta la próxima, ¿verdad? Gracias con todo mi corazón. Thanks a lot.